It started with just a cough, a small weakness in my body that I thought would pass in a few days. I had spent my entire life working hard, sacrificing for my son. And never once did I imagine that falling slightly ill would become the reason for my biggest humiliation. That evening, I sat on the couch, my hands trembling slightly as I reached for a glass of water. My son and his wife entered the room, their faces cold and unwelcoming. I expected concern, a gentle word, perhaps even a question about my health. But instead, I heard the words that tore my heart apart. His wife sneered, "She's always sick now, a burden in the house. What good is she to us anymore?" My son remained silent at first, his eyes avoiding mine. I searched his face, desperate to see the boy I had once held in my arms, the boy who once cried for me in the middle of the night. But the silence broke not with love, but with cruelty. He said in a harsh voice, "Maybe it's better if you don't stay here anymore. You need care, and we can't provide it. Tomorrow, we'll take you to the old age home." My heart stopped. The glass of water slipped from my hand, crashing to the floor, the sound echoing through the room like the shattering of my soul. "What are you saying?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "I am your mother. I raised you. I gave everything for you. And now, just because I feel weak, you want to throw me away like I'm nothing." But they didn't care. His wife crossed her arms and smirked, her words sharp like knives. "It's for the best. Old people belong in old homes, not here, troubling us every day." I could barely breathe. The betrayal was heavier than any illness. The son I had given my life to was now turning me into a stranger, casting me aside because I was no longer useful. That night, I cried silently, clutching my pillow, realizing that the greatest pain a parent can suffer is not sickness, but the cruelty of their own blood. And as the dawn broke, I whispered to myself, "You may throw me into an old home, but remember, God sees everything. One day, He will return this pain to you." The next morning came with a heaviness I could not describe. My son did not even look me in the eyes as he picked up my small suitcase and placed it by the door. His wife followed close behind, whispering instructions to him as though she were the master of the house, not me, the woman who had built it with her sacrifices. I sat quietly, my shawl wrapped around me, my heart pounding with disbelief. Every corner of the house reminded me of my life walls, where I had hung his childhood drawings, the kitchen where I had cooked his favorite meals, the bed where I had stayed awake countless nights when he was sick. And now, all of it was being taken away from me with one cruel decision. When the car arrived, my son motioned for me to stand. His voice was cold, almost mechanical. "Come on, it's time." I looked at him with tears streaming down my cheeks. "Time for what, my son?" "Time to abandon your own mother. Time to erase everything I have ever done for you." He clenched his jaw, refusing to answer. His wife rolled her eyes and muttered, "Don't make it dramatic. This is for your own good." For my own good. Those words stabbed deeper than any knife. If it was truly for my good, why did it feel like death? They escorted me into the car, my small suitcase clutched tightly in my hands. The ride was silent except for the sound of my heart breaking. I kept my eyes on my son, hoping, praying that he would turn to me, that he would stop the car, that he would remember the bond we once shared. But he never looked back. When we arrived at the old age home, the gates loomed over me like prison doors. My son carried my bag inside, set it by the bed they had assigned me, and without a word, he turned to leave. I called after him, my voice breaking, "Son, please, don't leave me here. I am your mother. This is not my home. My home is with you." But his wife tugged at his arm, and together they walked away, leaving me standing in the cold, unfamiliar room. I watched them disappear through the door, my legs trembling, my heart shattering into pieces too small to gather. I sank onto the bed, burying my face in my hands, and cried until I could not breathe. Alone, abandoned, betrayed, the illness in my body seemed nothing compared to the sickness of their cruelty. And as I lay there, my tears soaking into the thin pillow, I whispered, "They may have abandoned me, but God does not abandon His children. The day will come when they will stand where I stand, and only then will they understand this pain." The old age home was nothing like the house I had left behind. The walls were bare, painted in dull colors that carried no warmth. The corridors echoed with coughs, cries, and the slow shuffle of tired feet. Everywhere I looked, I saw faces marked by sorrow, mothers and fathers left behind by the very children they had once carried in their arms. My bed was small, the mattress thin, and the blankets smelled faintly of disinfectant. Each night, as I lay on that bed, I thought of the soft quilt I had once folded over my son when he was little, how I had stayed awake to check if he was warm, The memory felt like a cruel contrast to where I now found myself shivering alone in a place that did not know my name, only my number. During the days, I sat by the window, watching the world outside move on without me. Sometimes other residents spoke to me, each of them carrying their own stories of betrayal. One woman whispered, "My sons brought me here after their wives complained I was too noisy." Another said, "They said I was too much trouble, but I raised them all alone when their father died." Their words mirrored my pain, reminding me that I was not alone in my suffering, yet also deepening the wound. Meals were served at fixed times, plain food placed on trays. I ate in silence, surrounded by people whose eyes carried the same emptiness as mine. No laughter, no warmth, no family visits, only the ticking of the clock and the sound of spoons scraping plates. Every evening, I prayed in the small corner of my room. My hands trembled, but my voice was steady. "Oh God," I whispered, "you saw me give my life for my son. You saw me thrown out like I was nothing. I don't ask for wealth. I don't ask for comfort. I only ask for justice. Let him feel the pain he gave me. Let him know the emptiness of being abandoned." And each time I finished my prayer, I felt a strange calm in my heart. It was as if God himself was whispering back to me, "Your tears have not gone unseen. Your pain will not go unanswered." Back at the house I once called home, life did not remain as peaceful as my son and his wife had imagined. At first, they felt relief, thinking the burden was gone, that the house would now be lighter without my presence. But soon, the silence began to grow heavy. My son returned from work one evening, and as he sat at the table, the food his wife placed before him felt tasteless. He looked at the empty chair across the room, the chair where I once sat, waiting for him with a smile, asking how his day had been. That chair now stared back at him like an accusation. At night, he tossed in bed, unable to sleep. My face appeared in his dreams, not the strong mother he had once known, but the broken woman sitting in the old age home, tears in her eyes. He would wake up drenched in sweat, guilt gnawing at him like a relentless shadow. His wife, too, began to feel the unease. Neighbors had started to whisper. People who had seen me leave with my suitcase shook their heads in quiet disapproval. She abandoned her own mother-in-law, they said. What kind of woman does that? Invitations to gatherings grew fewer, and the warmth she once received from others turned into cold stares. But the heaviest weight fell on my son. At work, he found himself distracted, unable to concentrate. The respect he once enjoyed from colleagues seemed to fade, as if they too sensed something was wrong. One day, when a coworker casually asked, "How's your mother?" my son froze. His throat tightened, and he mumbled something before quickly changing the subject. But the question lingered, piercing his conscience like a thorn. At home, the very walls betrayed him. Every corner reminded him of me, the kitchen, where I once cooked his favorite meals, the bed where I had stayed awake when he was sick, the doorway where I waited when he came home late. Now those memories turned into chains that bound him with regret. And though his wife tried to reassure him, saying, "Forget her, she's fine where she is," the guilt in his heart only grew stronger. He began to realize that no matter what excuse he gave himself, he had done the unforgivable. He had abandoned the very person who gave him life. He did not yet know that God was only beginning to turn the wheel of justice. It started slowly, almost like whispers of fate, but soon it became clear. God's justice had begun. My son, once healthy and full of energy, suddenly found himself falling sick. At first, it was just small things: a constant headache, a heaviness in his chest, nights of restless sleep. He brushed it off, convincing himself it was nothing serious. But as days turned into weeks, the sickness grew heavier, and no medicine seemed to bring relief. At his workplace, mistakes began to pile up. His boss, once impressed with his dedication, now grew impatient. "You're not focused," he snapped one day. "If this continues, you'll lose your position." My son nodded quietly, but deep inside, he knew the truth. His mind was not in the office. It was stuck on me, replaying the night he left me in the old age home. My broken voice begging, "Don't leave me here, son, please." His wife, too, began to suffer. The same neighbors who once praised her now avoided her. When she walked through the market, women whispered behind her back, some pointing fingers. "That's the one who sent her husband's mother to an old home," they said. No amount of jewelry or fine clothes could hide the stain of her cruelty. Then came the financial troubles. Unexpected bills, losses in business investments, and sudden expenses drained them quickly. The money they once thought was enough began to vanish, like sand slipping through their fingers. Their home, once filled with comfort, now echoed with arguments and blame. At night, when the house was dark, my son would sit alone, his head in his hands, whispering to himself, "Maybe this is God's punishment. Maybe this is because of what I did to her." He remembered the way I looked at him with tear-filled eyes, and each memory was like a dagger piercing his heart. And as they struggled, far away in the old age home, I continued my prayers. With every tear that fell from my eyes, I whispered, "Oh God, you are just. Show them the weight of my pain. Let them feel what it means to be abandoned." And God was listening. The hand of justice had only just begun to move. The days turned darker for my son, and with every passing hour, the shadow of guilt grew heavier on his soul. His health continued to decline. His body felt weaker, his face pale, and his eyes hollow from sleepless nights. No doctor could explain why his condition worsened, but deep in his heart, he knew the answer. This was not just illness, it was the weight of his sin. One evening, as he sat alone in the living room, his wife began another argument. "All of this is happening because you're weak," she spat. "You keep thinking about her, about that old woman. Forget her, she's not our responsibility anymore." Her words, instead of giving him strength, struck him like lightning. That old woman, she was talking about me's own mother. He felt his heart twist painfully. Memories came flooding back, the way I carried him as a child. The nights I stayed awake when he had fever, the sacrifices I made so he could study, eat, and live comfortably. And then, the final image, me, standing at the gate of the old age home, begging him not to leave me, while he walked away. He pressed his hands against his face and began to cry, his body shaking. For the first time, he spoke the truth aloud. "What have I done? I abandoned my own mother. I raised my hand against her. I left her to suffer. This is why my life is falling apart. This is why I cannot find peace." His wife scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Enough of this guilt. If you want to ruin your life thinking about her, go ahead, but don't expect me to suffer with you." Her coldness cut him deeply, but it also opened his eyes further. He realized that the woman he had chosen to trust over me was the very reason he had destroyed himself. She had poisoned his heart with lies, but the choice to believe her was his own mistake. That night, he fell to his knees and prayed for the first time in years. His tears fell onto the floor as he whispered, "Oh God, forgive me. Forgive me for betraying the one who gave me life. Forgive me for sending my mother away. Give me one chance to make it right before it's too late." And as he cried, his heart heavy with regret, he knew one truth clearly: until he brought me back, until he sought my forgiveness, nothing in his life would heal. The weight of guilt became unbearable for my son. Every corner of the house screamed of my absence: the empty chair at the dining table, the silence where once I called his name, the scent of food that reminded him of meals I had lovingly prepared. Even the walls felt colder without my presence. One night, his nightmares returned more fiercely than ever. He saw me sitting on a hard bed in the old age home, coughing, weak and alone. In the dream, I stretched out my hand toward him, begging, "Don't leave me, son." But instead of holding my hand, he saw himself turn away. He woke up gasping, his chest tight, tears streaming down his face. He realized then that this was not just a dream, it was his punishment, his soul crying out in torment. That morning, he told his wife, "I can't live like this anymore. I'm going to bring my mother back." She snapped, her eyes flashing with anger. "If you bring her back, don't expect me to stay here. I won't live under the same roof as that woman." But for the first time, her words no longer controlled him. He looked at her with tired eyes and said firmly, "Then leave, because I cannot survive another day knowing my mother suffers because of me." She was stunned, realizing the grip she once held over him was slipping. But his decision was final. That very day, with trembling hands and a heavy heart, he drove to the old age home. Each mile felt like a lifetime, his chest aching with guilt, his eyes burning with tears. As the gates of the home came into view, his hands tightened on the steering wheel, his heart pounding with fear. Would I forgive him? Or would I turn my face away, as he had done to me? He didn't know the answer, but one thing he knew for certain: he could not live another day without trying. The car rolled to a stop outside the tall iron gates of the old age home. My son sat frozen for a moment, his hands trembling on the steering wheel. For weeks, he had imagined this moment: how he would look into my eyes, how he would beg for forgiveness. But now that he was here, fear gripped his chest. Finally, with a deep breath, he stepped out and walked through the gates. Each step echoed like thunder in his ears. When he entered the hall, The nurse at the desk looked up in surprise. "Who are you here to see?" she asked gently. His voice cracked as he replied, "My mother, Odessa." The nurse nodded and pointed down the corridor. "She's in the common room." He walked slowly, his heart pounding louder with every step. And then he saw me. I was sitting by the window, my shawl wrapped tightly around me, staring out at the garden where a few other elderly women sat together. My face looked older, my body frailer, and my eyes carried the weight of loneliness. For a moment, he stopped, unable to move. His chest tightened, tears threatening to spill. He remembered how he had once walked away from me at this very place, ignoring my cries. Now, the sight of me broke him completely. "Ma," he whispered, his voice trembling. I turned, slowly, my eyes meeting his. At first, I froze, unsure if I was dreaming. The same son who had abandoned me now stood there, his face pale, his eyes filled with regret. My heart ached with both love and anger. He walked closer, falling to his knees in front of me. His tears soaked the floor as he held my hands tightly. "Ma, forgive me. I made the worst mistake of my life. I listened to lies. I let my heart turn cold, and I abandoned you when you needed me most. Since that day, nothing in my life has been right. Please, please come home with me. Give me one more chance to be your son." My eyes filled with tears. My heart wanted to forgive, but the memory of being left alone, of begging him not to leave me, still pierced my soul. I trembled as I whispered, "You left me here, son. You called me a burden. Do you know what those words did to me? Do you know how many nights I cried, praying for God to give me strength?" He lowered his head in shame, unable to look at me. "I know, Ma, and I will never forgive myself for it. But if you can find it in your heart to forgive me, I promise I will spend the rest of my life making it right." The room was silent except for our sobs. Other residents watched quietly, their own eyes shining with tears. In that moment, even the walls seemed to hold their breath. I closed my eyes, whispering a prayer in my heart, and as I looked at my broken son kneeling before me, I realized God had answered. Justice had come not through anger, but through regret that had shattered his pride. The next morning, my son returned to the old age home, this time with the car prepared to take me away from that place of sorrow. He walked through the corridors with a different step, not the cold, heavy stride of the man who once abandoned me, but the humbled walk of a son who carried the weight of his guilt. When he reached my room, he stood at the door for a moment, watching as I folded my shawl carefully into a small bag. His eyes filled with tears, because even after everything, I had so little to take with me, just a few clothes, a prayer book, and the beads I had clutched during countless lonely nights. "Ma," he whispered softly, "please, come home." I looked at him long and hard, my heart torn. Memories of the betrayal still stabbed me, but another part of me remembered the boy who once clung to my hand, the child who cried when I was away, even for a few minutes. Slowly, I nodded. The staff helped me to the car, and as I stepped outside, the sunlight felt different, warmer, brighter, as if even the sky was witnessing my freedom. My son opened the door for me with trembling hands, his voice cracking as he said, "I will never let you sit alone in a place like this again. I promise." The drive back to the house was filled with silence, but not the cold silence of betrayal this time. It was heavy with regret and longing. He kept glancing at me through the mirror, his eyes red, as if afraid I might disappear again. When we finally reached the house, I stood at the doorway where I had once been cast out like a stranger. My heart raced, remembering the night I begged to stay, only to be dragged away. But now, my son stood beside me, holding my hand firmly. As he guided me inside, he whispered, "This house is yours, Ma. Always was, always will be." I looked around, the same walls, the same rooms, but everything felt different. Not because the house had changed, but because he had. The pride and arrogance in his eyes were gone, replaced by humility and remorse. And though my wounds were still deep, a quiet voice inside me whispered, "God's justice is not always loud. It is the kind that bends the heart until it breaks, and then teaches it how to love again." When I stepped into the house, the silence was overwhelming. The same walls that had once echoed with cruelty now seemed to wait in anticipation. My son led me gently to the living room, the very place where he had once spoken the words that shattered me. This time, he made me sit in my old chair, the one where I used to wait for him every evening. Moments later, his wife entered the room. She paused when her eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw no arrogance, no smirkingly shame. She lowered her head, her voice trembling as she said, "I was wrong. I lied about you. I planted those doubts in his mind. I was selfish, and I destroyed the peace of this home. Forgive me if you can." Her words were sharp, but they did not pierce me the way her lies once had. Instead, they revealed her downfall. The pride she once wore like armor had cracked completely. My son knelt beside me again, his voice shaking. "Ma, I cannot undo what I did. I cannot erase the night I left you in that place, or the pain I caused you. But I promise you, from this day on, I will never let you feel unwanted again. I will spend the rest of my life making up for my sin." Tears rolled down my cheeks as I listened. A mother's heart is strange. It can be broken into pieces, but somehow it still finds a way to beat for her children. My voice trembled as I whispered, "You both broke me. You left me when I needed you most. But if God can forgive his people, who am I to hold on to hate forever? I forgive you, but never forget this pain, because it is the lesson that will keep you from repeating it." The three of us sat in silence, tears streaming, the weight of betrayal mixing with the hope of forgiveness. For the first time in a long while, I felt the walls of the house soften, as though even they were relieved to see the truth finally spoken. In my heart, I knew God's justice had been served not by punishing them with fire or destruction, but by breaking their pride, humbling them, and forcing them to see the depth of their cruelty. That was a punishment no wealth or comfort could ever ease. The days after my return were unlike anything I had imagined. The same home that had once felt like a prison of humiliation began to change slowly, piece by piece, as if the walls themselves were trying to make amends. My son treated me with a gentleness I had not seen since his childhood. Every morning, he would bring me tea, set it carefully by my side, and ask, "Are you comfortable, Ma? Do you need anything?" His voice carried a softness that had long been missing. His wife, too, changed. The arrogance in her eyes was gone, replaced by caution and guilt. She began to cook for me, bringing meals to my room with her head bowed. Sometimes she would sit quietly across from me, as if waiting for me to scold her, but I said nothing. My silence was louder than words, and she knew it. The house felt different now. Where there had once been arguments and cold stares, there was now quiet respect. My son no longer raised his voice. Instead, he lowered it, as though afraid of breaking me again. His wife no longer smirked or mocked. Instead, she listened, her pride shattered. But the biggest change was in my own heart. I had returned, yes, but not as the same woman who had been thrown out. I was no longer weak, no longer silent. I carried with me the strength of my suffering, the dignity of having survived the loneliness of the old age home, and the quiet power of knowing that God himself had brought justice. One evening, as we sat together for dinner, I looked at my son. He was quiet, eating slowly, his eyes often drifting to me with shame. I placed my hand on his and said softly, "I forgive you, but don't ever forget what happened. Respect and care for your parents is not a burden, it is your duty, your honor. If you fail in that, life will fail you." He nodded quickly, tears filling his eyes. His wife, too, lowered her head, whispering, "Never again, Ma, never again." From that day, the house no longer belonged to them. Alone it became mine once more. Not because of ownership, but because of the truth. I was the root of this family, and they could no longer deny it. Word of my return spread quickly, just as my abandonment once had. Neighbors who had watched silently as I was taken to the old age home now whispered a different story. "She is back," they said. Her son brought her home with tears in his eyes. Relatives who had turned away out of disappointment began visiting again, some offering apologies. One of my cousins held my hand and said softly, "We judged too quickly. We thought you would never see justice, but look how God has humbled them." Their voices carried respect now, where once there had been pity and shame. Even in the marketplace, people who once looked at me with sympathy now greeted me warmly. "You are strong," one woman said. "You endured what no mother should endure, but see how the truth returned you to your home." Their words filled me with a quiet pride, not for myself alone, but for the power of truth and patience. But the greatest shift was for my son and his wife. Wherever they went, people no longer praised them. Instead, they reminded them of their sin. "You are lucky she forgave you," one elder told my son in public. "If she had not, you would have carried this shame forever." My son lowered his head, too humbled to reply. His wife, once so quick to talk back, now remained silent under the gaze of others. Inside our home, the whispers of society worked like invisible walls. They reminded my son and his wife every day of the betrayal they had committed. They could not escape it, not in the streets, not among relatives, not even in their own hearts. And as I watched this transformation unfold, I realized that my revenge had not come from anger or hatred, it had come from God's justice. The very people who had once thought me weak now saw me as strong, and the very ones who thought they had won by casting me out were now prisoners of their own shame. After weeks of silent regret and whispered apologies, my son began to take steps toward rebuilding what he had broken. Each morning, he sat by me with tea in his hands, sometimes speaking, sometimes just sitting in silence. At first, the silence felt heavy, but slowly it turned into comfort. I began to see in his eyes not only guilt, but also longing, the longing of a child who wanted to return to his mother's heart. One evening, he brought out an old photo album, the one I had kept hidden in the cupboard for years. He placed it on my lap and said softly, "Ma, let's look at it together." My fingers trembled as I opened the first page, and there he was, my little boy, smiling, with messy hair and bright eyes. My heart ached as I traced the photo with my hand, remembering how he used to run into my arms after school, how he used to whisper, "Don't ever leave me." My tears rolled down my cheeks, and for the first time since my return, I placed my hand gently on his. He looked at me with eyes full of regret and whispered, "I was blind. I forgot who you are to me. I promise I will never let you feel alone again." That night, we sat together for hours, flipping through the album, sharing memories. I spoke of the sacrifices I had made, the nights I stayed awake for him, the dreams I had carried for his future. He listened quietly, tears streaming down his face, as if every word carved itself into his heart. His wife, too, began to join us, though timidly. She brought fruits, sometimes tea, and would sit nearby, listening. The arrogance that once coated her voice was gone. Instead, she spoke softly, almost afraid. "I will not make the same mistake again," she said one night. "I was wrong, and I will spend my life serving you to make up for it." Though my heart still carried scars, I could feel the bond slowly stitching itself together again. It would never be perfect, but it was healing. And as I watched my son wipe his tears, leaning against my shoulder like he once did as a boy, I realized something profound. Forgiveness does not erase the past, but it gives the future a chance to bloom. Slowly, the atmosphere in the house began to soften. The heavy silence that once pressed against the walls was replaced by small moments of warmth, shared meals, quiet conversations, and a sense of care that had long been missing. My son no longer rushed out of the house without a word. Instead, he paused to ask, "Do you need anything, Ma?" His voice carried sincerity now, not obligation. His wife, too, showed a different face. Each evening, she brought me a cup of warm milk, her hands steady, her eyes lowered. She would sit by my side and listen quietly as I spoke about the days of my youth, or about the struggles I faced raising my son. Sometimes, I could see guilt flicker in her eyes, but beneath it was a genuine effort to change. One night, as my son sat at my feet, he said softly, "Ma, I know I don't deserve it, but will you bless me?" His words broke my heart. A son, who once raised his hand against me, now begged for the very thing he once took for granted. I placed my trembling hand on his head, my eyes closing as I whispered, "May God forgive you, and may He give you the wisdom never to repeat such cruelty. May your home know peace again, but never forget this penance is your reminder to remain humble." In that moment, something shifted. It was as if a burden lifted from his chest. His eyes, once heavy with regret, softened with relief. His wife, sitting nearby, began to weep silently, and for the first time, I saw not just shame in her tears, but gratitude. From that day, the house felt blessed again. My son's health slowly improved, their financial troubles began to ease, and even the whispers of society grew softer. People who had once judged them harshly now said, "They learned their lesson, at least they made it right." And I realized then that my forgiveness was not just for them, it was for me. Carrying hatred would have poisoned my heart, but offering forgiveness gave me strength, dignity, and peace. Time moved forward, but the memories of betrayal never left me completely. They lingered like faint scars, visible only to me, reminders of nights spent crying in loneliness. Yet those scars no longer brought me pain. Instead, they gave me strength. My son became a changed man. He no longer spoke with arrogance, no longer ignored the value of family. Each morning, before leaving for work, he touched my feet and said softly, "Pray for me, Ma." His wife, once filled with pride, now served me with humility, her voice gentler than before. The house, once poisoned by selfishness, now breathed with peace. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the house glowed with golden light, I sat with them both. My voice was calm, but my words carried the weight of truth. Never forget what happened, I said. Greed and pride can destroy a family faster than any storm. Remember that no wealth, no comfort, no joy is worth the tears of a mother. Because when you break a parent's heart, you break your own future. They both bowed their heads, tears shining in their eyes. We know, Ma, my son whispered. We will never forget. In that moment, I realized something profound. My revenge had not come through anger or punishment. It had come through patience, through the justice of God, and through the weight of their own regret. Their suffering was not in losing money or status, it was in realizing what they had done to the very woman who gave them life. And so, I forgave them fully, leaving the rest in God's hands. My story became a lesson, not just for them, but for anyone who heard it. Never abandon the ones who raised you, because the world may forgive betrayal, but God's justice never sleeps. The moral of the story is that no matter how old or weak a parent becomes, they are never a burden. A mother's love is the foundation of her children's lives, and to abandon her in her time of need is the greatest sin. Wealth, comfort, and pride are temporary, but the prayers and blessings of parents bring true peace. Those who disrespect or cast away their parents will one day face the same loneliness and shame they created. Life always returns what you give. If you give cruelty, you will receive it back. But if you give love and care, your home will always be blessed.